The woman mysteriously disappeared from her home, and her friends decided to go to the police. At first, it looked like she was on her own, but with every new lead, it just got more and more creepy. Eventually, the investigators managed to solve the mystery, and the truth turned out to be quite frightening. Mindy Schloss was born in 1955 in New York. When she was 25, in New York, when she was 25, she moved to Alaska, where she graduated from a local medical university. The woman obtained a degree in psychiatry and became a nurse at Fairbanks Hospital, although she was more likely to work in the field. In the hard-to-reach areas of Alaska, many people were unable to access the hospital on their own, so Mindy and her colleagues used a variety of transport, including boats and planes. She loved her work and approached it with the utmost responsibility. At the same time, the woman lived almost 600 kilometers from the hospital in Anchorage. She commuted to work on the plane and stayed at the hotel for all weekdays, returning home only for the weekend. It was August 2007. Mindy, who was 52 years old at the time, returned to Anchorage for the weekend and was soon to fly back to work. During her absence, she always asked her best friend Jerry to go to her house to feed the cat and give him the necessary medicine. On Saturday 4 August, a friend called her to discuss the matter, but Mindy never came to the phone. She couldn't get through to her all day, and it was weird. Then Gary contacted a mutual friend of theirs, but he didn't call Mindy that day either. At first, Jerry thought Mindy had gone out on business, but she didn't answer the phone the next day. Then her friend decided to drive to her house. Nobody answered the door either, and Jerry used the spare key. At first glance, everything looked normal. The house was in order. There were no signs of a struggle and other evidence that something bad had happened to Mindy. Only at the exit, Gary noticed something strange. The handle of the front door was loose, and the woman decided to twist the screws with a screwdriver, after which she went to work without knowing where her friend had gone. On Monday, August 6, Jerry called the hospital where Mindy worked. To her surprise, a woman never showed up for work, which was completely out of character for her, nor has she contacted any of her colleagues to warn them of her absence. All of this indicated that something could have happened to the woman, and Jerry decided to go to the police. The police department received a missing persons report, and Jerry and the detective went back to Mindy's house. No signs of forced entry were found. Nothing of value was missing from the house either. It ruled out the possibility of a burglar breaking into a woman's house. Moreover, Mindy had some drugs at home which were distributed solely by prescription. Any robber would probably take them because they were in demand with drug addicts. As they went into the hills, they found Mindy's car missing, which was also very strange. The woman always took a taxi to the airport and used her car only for city trips. The police concluded that something really bad had happened to the woman. The house was searched by a forensic team, trying to find any lead. However, all of this did not bring any results. At that time, the theory of the kidnapping was not very likely. The police thought Mindy might have had an accident. She often went out into the countryside, and the terrain there was quite dangerous. People may have fallen prey to wild animals, or simply accidentally fell off a cliff. However, this version did not bring the police any closer to solving the case, and they decided to start looking for suspects who, in theory, might have been involved in her disappearance. The first thing they did was look into Bob, a mutual friend of Mindy and Jerry. The man willingly cooperated with the investigation, and the detectives quickly established that on the day of the woman's disappearance, he was at work many kilometers from her home. As for the exact time of Mindy's disappearance, the police had no clear answer. The woman had not been in contact since Saturday. After examining her computer, forensics determined that the last time she used it was 1:30 in the morning. With no serious leads, the police decided to seek help from the public. They posted leaflets about the missing women in the city and also distributed the data on local TV channels. On the same day, they started getting calls from witnesses, but most of the leads went nowhere. People reported seeing Mindy in various places and even in other states, but none of these tips ever worked. Meanwhile, Bob and his co-workers decided to search the area where Mindy might have gone. She often went out for berries or just went for a walk there. Unfortunately, These searches also did not bring results. Detectives decided to go another way and contacted the bank, which used the woman. They asked them to check if there had been any activity on her cards in recent days. Here they were finally waiting for a serious lead. Early Sunday morning, the day after Mindy's disappearance, someone withdrew $500 from her debit card, the maximum amount available for withdrawal within 24 hours. The police immediately received the ATM camera footage from the bank, and it was an alarming sight. Turns out the money was taken by an unidentified man, and his face was covered in a bandana, so there was no identification. He only lowered the bandana after his face was out of camera view. Therefore, the police had no choice but to wait until the person tried to use another person's card again. Meanwhile, the detectives received another tip. From Mindy's colleagues, they learned that the woman had planned to renovate her house and hired workers. At some point, she had a conflict with her supervisor over the cost of the work. Mindy later admitted to her colleagues that she was afraid of him as he behaved strangely during visits to her house. The police checked this man out, but he had an alibi for the day the woman disappeared. They also questioned another worker who came to her home on Friday around 7:00 p.m. The man was also not involved, and he could not remember anything suspicious that night. Soon, the detectives were waiting for a new clue. Bank security reported that early this morning, Mindy's credit card was again charged $500, this time from another ATM. After examining the security footage, the police immediately realized that it was the same man as the first time. However, there was something strange on the recording. The man withdrew the money and left, but after a few seconds he returned to the ATM. For a while, he walked beside him, pushed the buttons, and eventually left again. After calling the bank, the detectives found out the reason for this strange behavior. The unsub forgot to pull the card, and the ATM then takes it to prevent the theft. The real owner can get it back by contacting the bank with his identity card. Of course, this was not an option for the criminal, so he lost access to Mindy's account forever. This time, the police were able to find a witness. He pulled up to the same ATM, and the unknown man got out of there. According to the witness, he got on his bike and drove away. This was a significant lead, as most people were traveling by car or on foot. But all this information was still insufficient to get closer to the solution, and the detectives decided to question all residents of the Mindy area. They asked people to remember any weirdness or point them at neighbors that aroused suspicion. To their surprise, many residents named one particular house, located right near Mindy's house. According to them, there were always parties, residents were always noisy and disturbed the public order. The detectives went there and found that there were a large number of people living in the house, but they were unwilling to talk to the police. Then the detectives went to a woman who lived right across from this house. She said she didn't see anything suspicious, but she seemed very nervous. The next day, the woman called the police station and asked the detectives to meet, but not at her house. They met somewhere else, and the woman shared a terrible story. Shortly before the detectives' first visit, she was visited by a man who lived in the house opposite her. He said that the police are walking around the area and asked the woman not to tell them that he lives here. On the question why, as he said he was on parole and he didn't want the police to know where he was. At night, the woman heard someone walking on the porch of her house. She looked out the window and saw that it was the same man. The woman was very scared and decided to tell the police. Detectives found out his name was Josh Wayne, who was 27 years old at the time. When they ran it through the system, they found out the guy was tried for murder 7 years ago. He was then accused of beating a woman to death, but the jury acquitted him. As a result, Josh was charged with falsifying evidence and sentenced to 6.5 years in prison. After 3 years in prison, he was released early. Detectives immediately identified him as the prime suspect. After talking to his roommates, they found out that Josh didn't have a car and that he was mostly riding his bike. But there was one problem. When the police started looking for him, the man disappeared without a trace. On Thursday, August 9, the police suddenly had another lead. A local trucker called them and said he spotted Mindy's car in a parking lot near the airport. He saw his picture in the newspapers and immediately recognized the car. Detectives who arrived at the scene confirmed that the car was indeed Mindy's. They also noticed that a security camera was pointing from the nearest building to the parking lot and requested a recording. It showed a man driving his car into the parking lot on August 4 at noon on the first day, coming out and rubbing the door handle. Apparently he erased his prints. Unfortunately, the quality of the recording did not allow to see his face. Sue examined the vehicle for prints or DNA and was able to extract some samples. However, they took time to study and there was no guarantee that they would be useful in this case. Mindy's purse was in the passenger seat, which could indicate that the woman was in the car with the perp dead or alive, without obtaining the desired result from the use of modern analytical tools. Detectives decided to use search dog. Few believed the idea was successful, as a week had elapsed since Mindy's disappearance, but for lack of other options, they turned to canine specialists. The dog was taken to the Atmans from which the man withdrew money and to Mindy's car. The dog picked up the trail and headed down the street towards the woman's house, 3 blocks away. She sniffed the front door and went straight to the house where Josh White used to live. The detectives, who never believed the idea of a search dog, were shocked. The service dog specifically pointed out to them that Josh was in Mindy's car near her house and those Atmans. The next day, the police repeated this experiment with another search dog. The result was the same. The dog came all this way and stopped at Josh's house. Although it was not conclusive evidence that worked quickly in court, the detectives decided not to waste time and obtained a warrant for the suspect's arrest. They went to his house, but the man hasn't been there for days. When they searched the building, they found the same jacket in which the unidentified man was caught on the cameras next to the Atmans and a receipt in his pocket for a cash withdrawal from Mindy's card. They then discovered a woman's gold watch and immediately showed it to Jerry. The woman confirmed that it was Mindy's. Forensics were able to cross-reference the DNA samples found on the steering wheel of Mindy's car with those from his house, and they're a match. That said, Josh was in the car with the missing woman. This evidence was already more serious, and the police were focused on catching the suspect. All over the city, leaflets with his signs were posted and even rented several billboards. According to the detectives, this was one of the largest search operations in Alaska history. Almost all law enforcement officials worked on the issue, and local residents reported any suspicious evidence. At one point, the police published the photos from the Atm cameras, and they were approached almost immediately by a woman named Lisa. She said she used to date Josh, and she's sure he's in the picture. What is important here is that the police did not name the main suspect, but what followed was a turning point in this case. Josh's other friend came to the police with a confession. Last week, she helped him move around the city in her car. One day, he left his backpack in the back seat, and the girl and her mother looked inside. There, they found some more Atom receipts and a phone. In the gallery, they found a photo of Josh, supposedly holding a gun. For the police, this information only added alarm. The detectives were already so worried that the suspect might attack someone else while they were looking for him. And thanks to his phone, it turned out that he was also armed. The police tried to convince his girlfriend to help them catch Josh. They wanted the girl to take the recorder with her and go with her to meet him and try to talk about what he had done to Mindy, but the girl was too scared and refused. However, she soon became involved against her will. On September 2, Josh came to her home and in an aggressive manner began demanding his backpack. Given that the girl had given it to the police, she had to make excuses on the way. Realizing that she did not have a backpack, Josh asked to take him somewhere far away from the police, but the girl refused. Instead, she offered to stay at her house, but Josh suspected something was wrong and left. The girl knew she wouldn't be safe until the police caught this man. She decided to follow him discreetly in her car while calling the detective. At some point, Josh reached the home of a friend and went inside. By that time, the police, special forces and the FBI had begun to gather together. All feared that the suspect would not surrender without a fight, and these fears were confirmed. Using a gun, Josh took 2 people hostage who were in the house with him. A lawyer was invited to talk to him, and after a few hours he was persuaded to surrender. During the interrogation, he barely spoke to the police, but investigators took the time to accuse him of Mindy's murder. They already thought the woman was probably dead, but without her body, it would have been extremely difficult to prove, so Josh was only charged with stealing Mindy's bank card and watch. The FBI agent decided to go rogue. He told Josh the charges, and he said it was all a lie. Then the investigator said that they had evidence that he was the one taking the money off the other's card, and Mindy herself reported the stolen card to the police. Hearing this, the suspect grinned and asked what games were being played with him. With this reaction, the FBI agent was finally convinced that Josh had killed Mindy, but the police still had to find her body to accuse Josh of murder. They had to work on the weather. It snowed early in the area, and they'd have no chance of finding Mindy if her remains were noticed. On September 13, the police received a call from an electrician who was working near the city of Wausau, almost 100 kilometers from Anchorage. He noticed the body of a woman in a wooded area and immediately thought it was Mindy. The lab expert confirmed it. The deceased was indeed Mindy Schloss. The medical examination revealed that the woman had been shot in the back of the head and her remains had been disposed of by fire. After extracting the bullets, they were able to establish that it was fired from the very weapon that Josh was caught with. The police now had no choice but to understand how the events that led to Mindy's death unfolded. Meanwhile, experts continued to investigate every millimeter in her home, trying to find any trace of Josh's presence. It was very difficult to do this. They had to pick up almost every hair from the floor of Mindy's house. Then they had to examine them in the lab. It took months, but eventually they found a hair that belonged to Josh. The DNA analysis confirmed that, and now the detectives have evidence of the suspect's presence in the victim's house. On 18 May 2008, 10 months after the murder, he was finally charged and brought to trial. There was an interesting situation during Josh's deposition. His ex-girlfriend Lisa, who hid him from a photo outside the ATM, refused to testify in court. She regularly visited her ex-boyfriend in prison, and at some point, the couple announced their intention to marry. The investigators were shocked by this pattern of events, but they quickly realized what was behind the move. The United States Constitution allows relatives not to testify against each other, and Josh apparently convinced Lisa to marry him for these reasons. However, there was one problem. Soon after his marriage, he was declared null and void because marriage to prisoners was prohibited by state law. But the detectives wondered why Josh was so keen to keep Lisa from questioning and testifying. Is it really all about some photo near the atom where you can't even see his face? Most likely, the girl knew much more. The investigators tried to get her to talk, but at first they couldn't do anything. At some point, however, Lisa contacted them herself and claimed that Josh had confessed to her murder during one of her visits to the prison. According to his story, there was a party at his house on Friday night. Josh, who had no means of support, decided to break into the house next door and steal something. This house was Mindy's place. Josh opened her door and started searching the house for valuables, and at some point, Mindy came into the room, and he knew right away that if he let her live now, he couldn't escape prison. He didn't want to go back there, so he grabbed the woman, took her to the bathroom, and tied her hands. The perpetrator then went to his home to get a gun, taking some of his belongings for the abduction. Before he went back to Mindy's house, he put bags on his feet and ducked, taped them to leave no trace. He then took the woman to the garage, put her in his own car, and drove out of town. After an hour's drive, he stopped in a wooded area, took Mindy off the road, where he killed her. After that, Josh went back to her house, cleaned, vacuumed the carpet, and left. The trial began only in the spring of 2009. The prosecution offered Josh a deal. He confessed to killing Mindy and another woman 7 years earlier in exchange for refusing the death penalty. So the authorities were hoping to close 2 high-profile cases at once, and Josh agreed. As a result, he was sentenced to 99 years in prison without parole. During the reading of the verdict, Josh cried, but at one point the situation escalated. When the judge called him a coward who killed 2 women, the criminal jumped up and screamed, "What about the men I killed?" At that point, his lawyers grabbed him and silenced him before he said anything else. This shout haunted the detectives for 5 long years until Josh offered the authorities a new deal in 2014. He agreed to confess to killing 3 men if he was transferred from a local prison to a federal one. Apparently, the conditions of detention there were much higher. Given that the offender's request was insignificant, the authorities agreed. Josh told me that he killed a man in Anchorage in 1994 when he was only 14. The next murder he committed was in 1999, and he killed 3 men a year later. The same day he killed a woman. The first 2 men were identified, but the identity of the third remains a mystery. The investigators have no doubt that Josh is indeed involved in these murders. They are more concerned about another matter. Are there any other crimes on his shoulders he's been silent about? In any case, the police managed to isolate him from society forever and prevent other murders that would have followed. Share your opinion on this story in the comments and be sure to like it if you liked it.